He didn't slam the door, just clicked it shut behind him, a sound more devastating than any shouted goodbye. The last words he gave her weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. They were efficient, cold, final. Armin had mastered the art of painless detachment, at least for himself. But for Sara, the pain wasn't in the words. It was in what they lacked. No apology, no regret, just indifference. That was the betrayal, not the affair, not the lies. It was that she didn't matter enough to hurt. The silence he left behind didn't crumble her, it calcified her. In the days that followed, her grief didn't roar or weep. It listened. It memorized. She fed her pain structure like a disciplined soldier feeding a future war. No rage, no begging. Just the slow, deliberate preparation of someone who had no intention of staying broken. Years later, she sealed the manila envelope with a quiet smile. There was no emotion on her face, only the satisfaction of symmetry. What he began that day, she was about to finish. The weight of the envelope was nothing compared to the weight of everything inside it: documents, dates, whispers of truth he never thought she would collect. But Sara didn't dwell on symbolism. This wasn't closure. This was consequence. After he left, there was no dramatic collapse, just a shift. A woman moving like clockwork through the routines of motherhood and survival. She learned how to be invisible on paper, in conversation, in the very spaces he once tried to dominate. Her existence became deliberate. 2 kids, 1 job, no noise, nothing to rattle suspicion. Yet beneath the surface, she was piecing together a life far more dangerous than he could ever understand. Armin moved on easily, predictably: new car, new apartment, new woman, same arrogance. His curated happiness was broadcast in filters and brunches, the digital high gloss of a man who believed he'd traded up. Sara didn't post pictures, she posted silence. But behind that curated quiet, she was studying, upgrading, becoming. He thought she'd settled. She hadn't. She'd sharpened. She began to write. Not a diary, a ledger. Page after page of neat, bullet-pointed betrayal, dates, bank transfers, lies cross-referenced with receipts. She didn't rage while writing. She recorded. Memory became evidence. Every detail cataloged with the precision of someone who wasn't just remembering, she was building a case. To Armin, she remained the quiet one, the civil ex, the overly polite co-parent who never challenged custody, never raised her voice. She texted smiley faces. She showed up on time. She complimented his girlfriend. And while he smirked through his shallow victories, she bled beneath, a mask that never slipped. Because smiles could be weapons too. You just had to wait long enough to draw them. Armin, intoxicated by his own luck, began slipping. He overextended his accounts, mixed personal funds with business ones, lied on documents without checking who was watching. He thought Sara didn't care about numbers, but numbers were her native language now. She didn't need to plant traps. He was digging them on his own, and she simply took notes. Then came the moment that shattered the delay. A careless comment from Armin's girlfriend about their daughters. Bruised feelings after being left at school again. A missed pickup, an ignored call. When Sara looked into her child's eyes that evening, she saw what Armin would never see. The invisible cost of arrogance. That was the moment patience died. From that point forward, the timeline accelerated. Every email, every message, every visit was calibrated. Sara knew when he'd be alone, when his guard would drop. She orchestrated encounters with witnesses present, forwarded anonymous tips at exactly the right hour, each breadcrumb laid with surgical precision. Armin had no idea he was being herded, and then he slipped. Again, a forged signature, a shady withdrawal. It was all she needed, the final nail. The trap was now not just legal, it was poetic. Sara stood back, letting him fall forward into it. And fall, he did, into the hands of auditors, into courtrooms, into whispers among colleagues. His fortress of lies collapsing plank by plank. The shift in power wasn't explosive, it was clinical. A bank account frozen. A business partner suddenly distant. Armin didn't notice the source, only the pattern of things going wrong. By the time he realized the pattern was Sara, it was already irreversible. She never had to raise her voice. Her revenge wasn't loud. It was logical. She didn't wait for his plea, didn't need his recognition. She watched from a distance as he stumbled through his unraveling. And when the envelope finally landed on his desk careered anonymously, it wasn't just a collection of documents. It was an execution. Financial, reputational, and emotional. Inside was a chronology of everything he'd buried, timeline verified, legally notarized, and devastatingly clean. The emails he forgot, the signatures he faked, the accounts he mismanaged, all compiled by the woman he thought had no spine. By the time he read the last page, Sara was already too far out of reach to blame. He asked himself how. How had she done it? When had she started? But he would never really know. Because she never gloated, she never warned. She just smiled the same quiet smile she had always worn. As his world crumbled, Sara did not celebrate. She picked her kids up from school, made dinner, kissed their foreheads. The justice wasn't in the destruction, it was in the peace she'd carved from it. She hadn't ruined him. He had. She'd simply stopped protecting him from the consequences, and in that final stillness, she understood. The best revenge isn't loud. It's thorough. It's patient. It's watching someone lose everything they threw away while you walk away whole. Sara didn't believe in soulmates, but there was something about Armin's confidence that felt like gravity. The kind that pulls you in before you even notice. You've left the ground. He met her in the library, all charm and wit, the kind of boy who knew how to smile just long enough for you to forget to breathe. She laughed too easily around him, and he listened just long enough to make her feel chosen. But underneath the compliments and midnight texts was something colder, something she mistook for mystery. Armin didn't see her. He saw a role she could fill. And by the time she realized that, the damage was already done. She should have listened to the sting behind his jokes, the ones about her big ideas that he'd laugh off as cute but unrealistic. She should have noticed how her dreams shrank in his shadow, how her joy dulled every time he rolled his eyes at something that mattered to her. The control was never loud. It came in the form of gentle corrections, helpful suggestions, and a constant reminder that he was the rational one. Sara adjusted, softened herself. What started as compromise became a silent surrender of who she was. By the time their apartment began to feel like a set on which she performed the role of perfect partner, Armin had already started disappearing. Late nights, vague explanations, the steady hum of detachment that replaced their conversations. She'd ask where he'd been, and he'd blink as if the question bored him. The more she gave, the less he showed up. She folded laundry alone, ate dinner alone, cried quietly when the children asked why Daddy never smiled anymore. He became a ghost in their home. But ghosts don't forget how to haunt. His affection turned to disdain, snide remarks at dinner, quiet punishments masked as forgetfulness. "You're imagining things," he'd say, when she questioned the credit card statements or the perfume that wasn't hers. The cruelty wasn't loud, it was surgical. He'd touch her shoulder in public, then flinch at it in private. He was a husband only when there were witnesses. She knew the lipstick on his collar wasn't hers, but what hurt more was how calmly he denied it. Like she was the fool for even asking. But deep down, long before evidence presented itself, she'd already known. There's a way a man looks at you when he no longer sees you. That emptiness in his eyes was more conclusive than any red stain on white cotton. The night it ended wasn't private. He mocked her in front of friends, laughed when she cried over a story she was telling. "You're too much, always too much," he said, sipping wine while everyone laughed nervously. That was the spellbreaker. Not the cheating, not the silence, but the public betrayal of someone who once claimed to love her. She didn't cry that night. She just left early and let them stay behind with him. She returned home to find a note taped to the fridge. "I need space. I'll send money soon." But there was no money. just a locked account, an empty closet, and 2 kids asking when daddy was coming back. Sara didn't scream. She didn't beg. The world assumed she was broken, and she let it. Because they didn't need to see what she was becoming. In court, she was stoned. Not because she didn't feel, but because she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing it. She let the lawyers speak. She let the documents speak louder. But in the silence, she was building. Saving screenshots, collecting receipts, marking missed visitations on a calendar. Grief became data, and data became strategy. He lived like the world owed him ease, floating from couch to couch and woman to woman while Sara sat up late with textbooks and spreadsheets, family law, custody agreements, financial disclosures. Words that once meant nothing now became her weapons. What he discarded out of arrogance, she mastered out of necessity. His freedom financed her education. Each sacrifice she made, each cold dinner reheated after work, each child she tucked in alone, was recorded not in anger, but in arithmetic. She logged it all, not to guilt him, but to build a ledger. He left her with debt. She turned it into documentation. Years passed. Sara changed. She got a new job, polished her arsum, wore blazers instead of hoodies. Her voice no longer trembled. In meetings, she didn't chase Armin down for what he owed. She outpaced him. She didn't scream his name in rage. She made sure it showed up on background checks, and in all his attempts to ruin her through custody battles, smear campaigns, and whispered lies, he inadvertently showed her exactly where his weaknesses were. He taught her how his world was built, on ego, shortcuts, and image. And once she understood the blueprint, dismantling him was just a matter of time. He didn't even notice the last time she smiled at him in court. By then, the judge had already seen the file neatly organized, time-stamped, and irrefutable. Custody shifted. Assets were frozen. His new job offer quietly retracted after an anonymous tip. His image, once curated so carefully, now tangled in records and consequences. Sara didn't announce her victory. She didn't need applause. She just picked up her children, held their hands, and walked forward, never once looking back. In the end, he hadn't just underestimated her. He trained her, and she made sure that lesson would be the one he never forgot. Sara no longer cried when Armin's messages came in. She read them the way a surgeon reads a scan, dispassionately, clinically, already diagnosing the rot beneath the surface. Can't make it this weekend. Something came up. The words were short, sharp, and entirely devoid of apology. She replied with calm, calculated politeness. Noted, that was all. But behind that single word was a ledger, and Armin had just added another line to it. Every missed weekend, every passive-aggressive jab cloaked in civility, every half-hearted offer to make it up next time. She logged it all, not because she wanted to remember, but because she needed the receipts. Armin didn't realize he wasn't exchanging messages with the same woman he once left behind. The old Sara might have argued. This one simply observed. Every silence he gave her became a sharpened edge she filed away for later use. The cracks in his promises were no longer isolated, they were patterns. Missed recitals turned into repeated absences. Child support payments thinned out, then vanished altogether. And when she checked the joint account they once shared, it was empty. Not drained, but scraped clean, with just enough left behind to appear incidental. But Sara wasn't stupid, and she no longer took things at face value. She began archiving pain with a precision that could rival any forensic analyst. The file grew slowly, like a vine, crawling up a wall. Cancelled pickups, Venmo screenshots, school emails showing late tuition notices he'd promised to cover. She didn't document out of spite, she did it with the mind of someone laying groundwork. She numbered each entry, categorized them by type, and each time he lied, he unwittingly contributed to the case file that would later bury him. She studied, at night after the kids were asleep, tax codes, custodial rights, asset tracing. She didn't just want to know how to hold him accountable, she wanted to speak the language of the systems he thought were his shield. Bonuses that skipped disclosure, Payments were routed through shell accounts. He believed his financial smokescreens made him untouchable. Sara just needed time. And time she had plenty of, while Armin posted filtered photos with his new girlfriend and captioned them with lines like "fresh starts are underrated." Sara built quietly, a fortress of facts, a war room of spreadsheets and affidavits. She didn't like war metaphors, but if she was going to strike, it would be from higher ground. No rage, no vengeance slogans, just logic, timed execution, and consequence. The version of her he remembered was gone. In her place stood someone sharper, leaner, legally fortified. Her new job paid well enough to afford independence, and her circle had changed from co-workers to colleagues to silent allies, people who understood law, contracts, enforcement. She was no longer responding to what Armin did. She was orchestrating what would come next. She never threatened him, never warned him. She simply whispered in the right ears, sent the right emails, consulted experts who didn't need to know the full story, only the relevant facts properly formatted. She filed reimbursements with interest, backdated claims, served formal notices with polite headers and firm deadlines. Nothing illegal, nothing emotional, but everything was airtight. By the time Armin realized something was coming, it had already arrived. Sara's blueprint had been in motion for months. The letters were stamped, the forms were certified, the demands were structured in legalese that required lawyers to translate. And every page he flipped told him the same thing: he was not in control. He ignored the first letter, called it overkill. The second one made him nervous. The third one landed in the inbox of his HR department, accompanied by documentation proving he'd underreported income. Then came the state review of his financial disclosures, and suddenly, that fresh start he'd flaunted online started to feel like borrowed time. Sara didn't chase him down for child support. She audited his silence. Each omission, every conveniently forgotten obligation, had grown interest, not emotional, financial. It was no longer about fairness, it was about debt recovery. She wasn't demanding anything unreasonable. She was simply collecting. When the court summoned him, he walked in smug, walked out stunned. He hadn't expected the paper trail, the timestamps, the cross-reference documents from schools, banks, and therapists. He hadn't expected the version of Sara that stood with her head held high and her lawyer speaking for her. The courtroom didn't need her tears. It needed her records. By now, she didn't need to see him in person. Her plan didn't require confrontation, just certified delivery. She served him consequences like invoices, unemotional, unrelenting, precise. He had once reduced her worth to a forgotten text. She now returned the favor with legally binding debts. The bill that arrived wasn't for her pain, it was for years of unpaid parenting, financial dodges, and emotional absences. It came complete with calculations, compounded interest, and stamped approvals. She didn't need revenge, she needed recognition, and she got it in court orders, garnished wages, and frozen accounts. Armin had left to start fresh. What he hadn't understood was that fresh starts don't erase footprints. Sara had left a trail, subtle and deliberate. Every silence she endured had been strategic. Every act of patience, every overlooked slight, had been the quiet laying of traps he'd one day trip over. When the judgment landed, she didn't smile. She closed the folder, took her children's hands, and walked away, not victorious, just free. And in the end, it wasn't about making him suffer. It was about proving she never needed to stoop to his level to win. Armin smiled as he signed the final page of the business registration, sliding the paper across the table toward his girlfriend, Camille. She scribbled her name beside his, unaware or maybe perfectly aware that she'd just become the legal owner of a shell company masking his real income. Everything he earned would pass through her name. No direct deposit trails, no red flags, no obligations to anyone he'd rather forget, especially not Sara. He believed he'd outsmarted the system again. Another clever workaround, another lie buried beneath paperwork. What he didn't realize was that lies like his rarely vanish. They settle into silence, then resurface when you least expect it. Sara didn't hear about the new company. She didn't need to. The mistake came wrapped in something ordinary, a school form sent home in her son's backpack. Just another annual update, just another checklist. But there it was, her name listed as the emergency contact, and in a margin note, a detail most people would have missed: tuition covered via third-party corporate payment. The name of the company wasn't familiar, but something about it caught her attention. Not the name itself, but the fact that it was used where personal responsibility should have been. It felt like Armin, polished on the outside, but hollow. If you pressed too hard, Sara didn't press. She pulled gently, persistently on that single loose thread. A quiet evening, her laptop open, a name typed into a public business registry. And just like that, the illusion began to collapse. Camille's name, Armin's signature on supporting documents, payments routed through accounts disguised as unrelated business expenses. Each layer designed to protect him had become a breadcrumb, trail leading straight back to him. She didn't flinch. She kept going. Bank transfers, pay stubs, online portfolios, a network of lies disguised as entrepreneurship. But it wasn't just deceit, it was evasion. Sara didn't react emotionally. She responded methodically. Every dollar, every year, every receipt. She didn't guess at the cost, she calculated it. Diapers, co-pays, school uniforms, counseling sessions after nights her son waited at the door and Armin never came. Childcare Sara couldn't afford but found a way to cover. Nights worked, vacations skipped. All of it logged into a spreadsheet backed by state guidelines and statutes Armin never thought she'd bother to read. She organized it all into one simple folder. Not digital, not abstract, printed, tangible. Then, she enclosed it in a registered manila envelope, sealed and notarized. It arrived at Armin's new apartment on a Wednesday afternoon, delivered to a name he didn't expect would find him again. He opened it thinking it was just more paperwork until he saw the total at the bottom. $147,320. Every figure broken down, every claim documented, legal references footnoted. What stunned him wasn't the amount, it was the silence surrounding it. No threats, no rage, just numbers, precision, and power. He laughed, called it cute, a desperate bluff. But the moment the court seal caught his eye, the laughter died in his throat. The motion was real. The freeze on his business account was already in effect. Camille's name was on every form. She wasn't an accomplice, just a witness now entangled in a mess he'd created and never thought would be traced. The story went viral faster than he could draft a defense. A local journalist picked it up first, then national media. Headlines blared across screens and feeds. Single mom sends ex a bill for raising his kids and wins. Photos of Sara, arms around her kids, smiling without spite. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. For Armin, the shame came in waves. Camille's silence turned to panic. His partners backed out. Clients pulled meetings. Investors asked questions he couldn't answer. His confident persona, once curated for applause, unraveled in the face of receipts he couldn't deny. He had mocked her for years, said she was overreacting, dramatic, too much. But now the silence he once weaponized screamed louder than anything he could silence. Bank accounts frozen, credit lines revoked, scheduled court hearings. Every strategy he used to hide had now become evidence used against him. By the time he realized the full extent of what Sara had done, it was too late to fix it. He sat in meetings trying to explain why his assets were locked, why government agencies were involved, why former allies refused to return his calls. Every lie he'd crafted had become a binding truth in someone else's affidavit. Sara never gloated. She didn't post, didn't brag. She simply moved forward, stronger, unbothered, focused. She wasn't interested in breaking him, only in making sure her children never had to carry the weight of his neglect. And as Armin stared at the final notice of garnishment, realizing he'd now spent years repaying debts he thought he escaped. He finally understood. The woman he underestimated had never been too much. She'd been just enough to destroy him quietly, legally, completely. Sara stepped into the courtroom quietly, her presence unnoticed by most. There was no need for grand entrances or dramatic gestures. What she carried was far more powerful than words or stares. Inside her bag were stacks of documents, each page carefully gathered over years of silent endurance and steady determination. Every receipt, every message, every recorded absence was a weapon refined by patience and precision. This was her arena. Now, and she was ready. Armin took the stand with a confident smile, trying to charm the room with jokes and casual deflections. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, practiced for occasions just like this. But beneath the polished surface, cracks began to show. The judge's steady gaze pierced through the performance, recognizing the emptiness behind the bravado. The veneer of control was thin, and it was about to shatter. Sara never wavered. When it was her turn, she spoke with calm clarity, letting the facts unfold one after another. There was no need for anger or emotional outbursts. The truth was ruthless enough. Receipts lined up like soldiers, call logs painting a timeline of broken promises, and betrayal laid bare in black and white. Each piece of evidence spoke louder than any shout ever could, making silence her loudest weapon. Words Armin had thrown at her years ago returned to the courtroom with a heavy echo. Too much, he had called her, dismissing her pain as excess. Now, those very texts were read aloud, no longer whispers in private but declarations heard by all. The judge absorbed every syllable, finally treating those words as the serious transgressions they were, and not the mockery Armin had intended. The verdict wasn't just about money. It was a reckoning. Retroactive child support that accounted for every missed dollar, penalties for years of evasion, and a public acknowledgement of responsibility. Justice wasn't a whisper or a shadow. It arrived with weight and consequence, binding Armin to the obligations he had long ignored. Every figure on the ledger was a testament to a life Sara had carried alone. Armin searched desperately for escape, but this time there was nowhere to hide, no crowd to sway, no smokescreen to raise. The lies he had built his life upon collapsed under the undeniable truth. For the first time, he was stripped bare, forced to confront a reality he had tried so hard to avoid. There was no clever excuse left, no final act to save his crumbling facade. As the gavel came down, Sara reached for her children's hands. Walking out of the courtroom, she felt no triumphal roar, only steady resolve. She hadn't come here to claim victory over a man. She had come to protect the family she had never stopped holding on to. Her strength was quiet but unyielding, a promise that no absence could ever break. Later, with a calm finality, Sara deleted his number from her phone. There was no bitterness, no lingering questions. It was not a goodbye screamed in anger, but a quiet reclaiming of power. She closed that chapter gently, making space for what came next without the weight of the past pulling her down. This journey hadn't been about breaking him. It had been about building herself piece by piece, lesson by lesson. Each step forward was a declaration that her worth was never dependent on someone else's approval or presence. Her victory was in her own hands, shaped by resilience and grace. Armin's ego had sparked the fire, but Sara was the one who lit the match. She didn't scream or fight. Instead, she stood firm and let the consequences do the work. He was left to face the cost of his choices, calculated, certain, and undeniable. And in that silence, she found her true strength. Armin's world began to unravel the moment Sara walked away. The life he'd carefully constructed, built on charm and deception, started to collapse beneath him. His reputation, once polished and untouchable, cracked open as financial obligations he ignored surged like a tidal wave. Years of unpaid debts, mounting legal penalties, and public shame chained him to a fate he never foresaw. Every careless choice echoed back, binding him tighter in the grip of consequences he had long dismissed. The fall was inevitable, and there was no hand to catch him. While Armin sank into chaos, Sara rose with a quiet strength that stunned even herself. From the ashes of betrayal, she forged a new path, founding a financial coaching group dedicated to empowering single mothers. Her mission was clear: to help others reclaim their worth, their independence, and their futures. Each success story fueled her determination, transforming pain into purpose. She wasn't just rebuilding her life, she was lighting a beacon for those who had been silenced or sidelined, proving resilience could be taught and learned. Her story, once locked behind courtroom doors and private battles, found its voice in a podcast titled Too Much and Just Enough. What started as a personal catharsis blossomed into a movement, her words echoing far beyond any judge's chambers. Listeners from all walks of life tuned in, drawn by her honesty and fierce grace. Through this platform, Sara transformed her scars into stories of strength, connecting with those who knew the ache of being underestimated, dismissed, or ignored. Her voice was no longer just hers, it belonged to every woman who had been told she was too much. One evening, a simple payment alert lit up Sara's phone, a notification of funds transferred as part of the legal settlement. It was more than money. It was the sound of justice arriving in her pocket. That small, unassuming beep carried the weight of years of silence, struggle, and sacrifice. It reminded her daily that accountability, though delayed, always found its way home. Each deposit was a silent victory, a reaffirmation that standing firm and fighting quietly could topple even the tallest lies. Her children grew shielded by her strength, their childhoods untouched by the battles they never needed to witness. They knew only the mother who smiled with genuine warmth, who carried them through life with unwavering love. Sara made sure they felt secure and cherished, a sanctuary built from the ruins of hardship. Their laughter filled the spaces once occupied by pain, proof that her fight was never just for herself, it was for them, for their future unmarred by past wounds. Years later, standing on a conference stage before a room full of strangers, Sara's voice carried the power of her journey. She ended her speech with a smile that held every struggle and triumph. "They said I was too much," she declared, "but I say I was the invoice for unpaid labor." The applause that followed wasn't just for her, it was for every person who had been overlooked, every story waiting to be told. Her resilience had become a testament, not just of survival but of undeniable strength. Sara's revenge never burned with fury. It wasn't shouted from rooftops or marked by chaos. Instead, it was quiet, measured, and precise, signed, sealed, and delivered with unyielding resolve and interest. The best vengeance, she learned, wasn't about breaking someone else, it was about building yourself so thoroughly that the past could no longer harm you. And in that quiet power, Sara found not just justice, but freedom.